The wood is now all stained. Everything is pre-drilled. It was all pre-drilled before I stained it. Everything is now ready to be installed in the actual closet. Now this is going to be something I look at every single day. So as a result, I actually want this to come out fairly nice. So I'm going to be using the level on absolutely everything, and I'm going to be playing around a lot with the fitment to make sure everything is exactly as I want it. I'm also going to install all the upper wood first. That way, if anything for some reason falls or slips and comes down, it's less likely to damage anything below it. So with that in mind, let's get to installing. Now, as I said, I do have all the screw holes pre-drilled on this board, so what I'm going to be doing, because I don't have any friends to help by holding this in place when I go to screw it into the wall, is I'm going to get all the screws started when the board is still on the ground, and then when I'm holding it into place, I can just go from one screw to the next with the screwdriver, and I don't have to worry about trying to get them started while holding it up. I double check the distance between the board and the ceiling along the entire length using the tape measure just to make sure my spacing is reasonably consistent, and then I make sure that my other board goes at the same height on the other side. If you don't get the spacing the same on both sides from the ceiling and you don't use a level to make sure they're parallel, when you put in this backboard across the back wall, it's not going to line up properly with one or both of the sideboards. The board fitment should be tight enough that it doesn't take a lot of force to hold them in place, but not so tight that you damage the wall or the other boards when you're putting new boards in. After installing the pole sockets and the pole, the upper half is complete. I now have all the surrounds and the bar in place for the upper. Before I went ahead and installed the lower, I wanted to check two things to make sure I got this right. I physically put a shirt on this pole, and I wanted to make sure that one, this wasn't hitting the back wall so that I wouldn't be scraping that up every time I slide my shirts around, and two, that I have the height about correct for the lower shelf as well. Try to put it over here so you can actually see in the light, but where the lower shelf is going to be, so it's going to come out to just about there, which is pretty much perfect given the length of these shirts. And I might have a few shirts that might be a little bit longer than this, but they're not going to be several inches longer. So that's about the right height we want. So I'm not going to bother showing it, but I am going to put that lower one in, and then I'll resume the video after that. I now have the top and the bottom bars, and the surrounds are both in. There's a couple things I want to note if you're trying to do this yourself. First and foremost, I left this about as long as I could reasonably fit, and that way, instead of having the gap here, I use this as basically a shim so that it was so tight it pushed the board tight on both walls. If I had not done that, there would still be a gap here under both sides, and you can see it over here too on the lower one, right? There's a slight gap there, but I made this as long as I possibly could to fit it in, and then that way it's pressing against both sides and reducing the gap as much as possible. However, it also will be a little harder to squeeze into place because you're doing that, but I think it's worth the visual benefit that you get. The other thing that went wrong is the cup hook on this side. This screw that goes in the center was actually spinning in this backwood board. As a result of that, and in large part because of how tight this bar fits in, every time you turn the bar, it didn't really take a lot of force to turn it, and this cup hook would turn with it. There's only a couple options I really had to try to rework that. What I did to remedy that is I took the bar out, I took the entire back of this cup, covered the entire thing with a healthy layer of glue, and I also dipped that center of the screw in glue as well to fill the rest of the hole, and then I screwed it in that way. And when I put the bar back in, that gave it ample pressure to press it into place. I really don't think it would have rotated out of place on its own while the wood was drying, but having this in here to press it firmly up against is going to give it a nice strong bond. I did need to give it more time than I initially wanted to allow that to dry, because that is what they would consider a structural joining for the wood that will be supporting a lot of weight, and the tight bond glue recommends at least a 24-hour cure under some sort of pressure like this is applying prior to applying any of the stress to the joints that are being held. Now that time has passed, the upper and lower bars are in here as well as the surrounds, and I know there's a few other things that I want to do a little bit farther down the road, but I at least need to get this closet to a usable point so I can get rid of the clothes and the rack that are just accumulating over here on the other side of the room. In order to get it ready for that, I'm just going to scrub the floor and all the paint droppings that were not caught by the cardboard. I'm going to scrub those off. I also noticed I marked up the wall a little bit right here when I was installing these top boards, so I'm going to go back and clean that off as well. Then I'm also going to pre-drill a few other small holes that I know I'm going to put into these boards. I obviously want to finish generating all the dust before all of my work clothes are in here, otherwise I am going to have a very fun few weeks as I figure out what is and is not covered in dust. I'm not going to show cleaning up that spot on the wall and the floor, that's just going to be scrubbing, and anyway my fat butt's going to be in the way so you won't be able to see it. I was able to scrub all of the paint chips off of the floor using a sponge. I was using the Scotch-Brite side. It doesn't have enough grit to it to really damage the polyamide floors, but it does peel up all the little paint dots like these that are really not well adhered. After I did that, I also put in one of these shirts again just to give me an idea of how much space was going to be around the bars. Now that I have that established, I'm going to be pre-drilling the holes I was talking about earlier, and I'm going to put them over here. You'll see what those are for in a minute. Now it's going to be difficult to see, but what I'm doing is I'm putting little cup hooks into this board on the side after pre-drilling the holes. And if you're going to have a bunch of little holes or hooks or hangers like this in a row, make sure you really take your time with the measurements and you get all the spacing level and exactly correct between each hook. Otherwise, it's going to annoy you every single time you look at it because you're going to know which one is in the wrong spot. I'm dipping the end of each hook in wood glue prior to screwing it in to hold it in place better, and I'm wiping up the excess with a Q-tip if it squeezes out. Down here where I was pre-drilling the holes, I put these little hangers up. You'll see what those are for in a minute because I am now at the point where I'm going to move most of my clothing into here to try to reclaim some of my house again. Without farther ado, let's get to it. I'm fully aware that I have way too many work clothes because my girlfriend regularly reminds me. That being said, this is the vast majority of them. I now have the bulk of my working clothes in this closet. Some are still in the wash and I need to iron them, so I don't have all of them in here yet, but this is definitely the vast majority. Over here, these cup hooks are for all of my belts. Sizing wise, if it went any lower, they would all have been hanging on the ground, and then once they do that, kind of like this one, they buckle out a little bit, and I didn't like that as much, so for that reason, I put it a little higher up. Unfortunately, what that means is there's not a whole lot else I can hang on this board right here. As I said in the very beginning of this project, space utilization is going to be a huge factor because this is not a big closet. I did get everything sized pretty well though, that it is not really hitting this back wall, but it is extremely close to it. So I think from that perspective, I put the rods in a very good location. For now, because I got the bulk of it done, this is going to go on hiatus real quick. I do have some extra space here and on this upper bar, and I have the same thing on the upper and lower on the other side. So I do still have some odds and ends that I want to try to fit in here. I just have to figure out how I want to do that now that I know how much space is left. But in the meantime, this is actually livable, and that means I have finally removed this massive heap of all my working stuff. So that is good. All right, I am signing off for now. I will see you guys next time.